Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Daphna Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the fourth in our series of Giller Monthly Master Panels. Tonight's conversation will focus on Asian Canadian writers as they explore identity through their art. For those of us in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, among other many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'd like to welcome tonight's host, the one, the only, Ali Hassan. Ali is a stand-up comic, actor, and radio personality. He is the host of the CBC comedy show Laugh Out Loud, a frequent guest host on CBC Radio's Q, and the host of Canada Reads, the annual book battle celebrating the best of Canadian literature. His new book is called Is There Bacon in Heaven?, which comes out in 2022 with Simon & Schuster. Ali will introduce our panelists, for tonight's event. Please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and they'll be put to the panel during the last 15 minutes of tonight's broadcast. I'm as eager as you are to get to it, so without further ado, please welcome Ali Hassan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Daphna. Thank you to Daphna, to Alana, to the entire Scotiabank Giller Prize Committee for having me be part of this. This is a huge thrill for me. There's another thrill I have in life, which is watching playoff hockey. I'm not gonna think about that right now. I don't know what the Venn diagram is of playoff hockey fans and people who like to engage in anything that the Giller puts out, especially Asian Canadian Writers Series. I want to believe there's some overlap. I already got a text from one friend saying that phone in one hand watching the game and laptop in another on another part of his desk watching this. So however you are consuming this, we're so happy to have you here. This will be recorded and it will be re-aired later in the week, if not starting tomorrow. So you'll have a chance to dive in a little deeper in this conversation if there's stuff that you missed. But again, as Daphna said, no time like the present. I got thrown off a bit. We started right at 7. As a kid who was raised in a Pakistani home, to start right on time, it just, genetically, somehow we work against that. So I'm so happy we started right on time. This is going to be an hour long. I'm going to introduce you to all the people on the panel, the 4 writers on this panel. And if you have questions, that's the other thing I wanted to say. If you have questions, feel free to think of them as we go through. Around 7:45. We'll flip to a Q&A, and any questions you have for the authors, we'll do our best to make time for that. But we will be starting. We will be wrapping up around 7:59. That is not because of hockey. I am a professional. That is because out of respect for everybody's time, including our panelists and yourselves in our audience. All right, let's get started. First person I'm going to welcome is Kerry Sakamoto, and I'll welcome Kerry in just a moment. I want to give Kerry the proper intro here. Kerry Sakamoto, Toronto-born author to Japanese-Canadian parents, and most of her writing has dealt with experience of Japanese Canadians. Sakamoto's debut novel was called The Electrical Field. That was in 1998. That won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best First Book. It also won the Canada-Japan Literary Award, and it was a finalist for a Governor General's Award. Her second novel, which by the way took 5 years to research, came out 5 years later in 2003. It's called 100 Million Hearts. And then she took some time off to raise her children, from what I understand. Her fans suggest that maybe she took too long to raise her children and was away from writing for too long. That's between her fans and her. But her third novel, which came out in 2018 with Penguin Random House, is called Floating City. It was a finalist for the Toronto Book Award, and it again earned her the Canada-Japan Literary Award. That was for the second time. So please give some good energy for Kerry Sakamoto. I can't hear your applause, obviously, but I'll feel it. Kerry will feel it. Hi, Kerry. Nice to see you. I think you might be on mute. There's a possibility you might be on mute. I'm ready to say that numerous times tonight. Did we miss anything? No, no problem at all. Nice to have you here on this panel. Next up, I'm going to introduce Philip Huynh. Philip was born in Vancouver, where he continues to reside. I don't know, do we call Richmond Vancouver? I think we do. I think we still say, if we're addressing the country, we say that he is still in Vancouver. His parents fled Vietnam during the Civil War, and he was born in Vancouver. His stories have been published in the Malahat Review, the New Quarterly, Event, and the Journey Prize Anthology. He has been cited in the Best American Stories. He's the winner of the Open Season Award from the Malahat Review. A number of different awards he has won, including Asian Canadian Writers Workshop Emerging Writers Award. His short story collection, it was a very celebrated, The Forbidden Purple City. And he is, as you're about to see, a practicing lawyer, Philip Huynh. Let's welcome Philip to our panel. Philip, your background screams lawyer. That's all I'm going to say. It feels like you could, be doing, it feels like you could be watching hockey, doing some kind of legal counsel, and be on this panel at the same time.
Yeah. It must be the portrait of my daughters and of the fish. I hope we didn't lose most of our audience when you mentioned that there was a lawyer on the panel.
In fact, it adds to our diversity, if nothing else. As I'll explain once we have everybody in what kind of a diverse, even though it's Asian Canadian, it is a very diverse Asian Canadian crew. So I'll get into that in just a minute. Next up, I want to introduce Maria Kamar. Now, Maria, if you don't know her yet, where have you been is the obvious question. She goes under the name of Hate Copy. Her hatred for copywriting so strong that was the Instagram handle she chose, and it stuck. And Maria has, with her art, combined South Asian culture, modern pop art, Roy Lichtenstein, all with a punk and a metal attitude. That old cliche. No, it's very, very original, very badass work. It tackles themes of racism, of patriarchy, of sexism. And of course, it tackles the theme of gossiping, untrustworthy aunties, which I have an unfortunate connection with. Everyone, please welcome Maria Kamar.
Hi, guys.
Maria Kamar looking glamorous.
Thank you.
Philip, a plant wouldn't be the worst thing in your office if we can learn something from Maria's design, art. Finally,
Let's hear that lawyerly.
Yeah, you can be a lawyer with a sense of fashion. There's room for that. Finally, on this panel, I'm going to welcome Yasuko Thanh. Yasuko's short story collection was called Floating Like the Dead. That was in 2012 that came out. It was on Quill and Quire's list of best books of 2012. The title story from that collection won the Journey Prize. The short story called Spring Blade Knife, also from that book, won the 2013 Arthur Ellis Award for Best Crime Short Story. The book itself, Floating Like the Dead, was nominated for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, which is BC's award for Best Fiction. And then her first novel, Mysterious Fragrance of the Yellow Mountains, was published in 2016. That novel won the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. Her newest book, which is a memoir, is called Mistakes to Run With. That was published in 2019. And she's working on another novel, which is tentatively titled Teddy's Blow-Off Attraction. Please welcome Yasuko Thanh. Hi, Yasuko. How are you? I'm going to ask you to get off mute. Hi, nice to see you. I will let everybody know also that Yasuko lives a dream existence in beautiful Victoria, BC. But what comes along with living in Victoria, BC is also not the best internet connection. Let's just blame the West Coast for that.
That's what we'll do.
Right. There is a risk that we might lose you in the sense that your screen might freeze, but we should be able to hear you. That's been the case so far. Anyway.
Excellent. I've got my fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Since we have you right now, Yasuko, and since we have this momentum going, I wanted to start off with what we typically call, softball questions. I wanted to ask you all about your journeys to becoming writers. It's an Asian Canadian writer panel, and many Asian Canadians, there's pressure to be something more than quote unquote just a creative person, right? Philip looks like he succumbed to that pressure, and that's why he's sitting in a lawyer's office that is his own office right now. But that was a big thing when I was growing up. It was, the arts aren't reliable, even though my father was a short story writer and my father was a poet and my grandfather was a poet in Pakistan. Somehow, if anybody, art for me should have been promoted and encouraged, and it still wasn't, because there was no seniority and no tenure and no, what I don't even know what they're called when you retire. What's that called? Safety, pension. The word is pension. There was nothing at the end. That's how well versed I am in these things. So I wanted to start with you, Yasuko. What does, being an Asian Canadian writer, did your identity inform your work in the sense that, was it a help? Was it a hindrance? And what was that journey like to get to where you are?
Well, I think that the majority of the public thought that I just sort of sprang onto the scene in 2009 with that Journey Prize win. What most people couldn't see was that I had been working furiously on my own craft for 20 years previous to that. So in some ways, the first short story collection was like a collected works. And I do find it interesting, and I'm not coming to any conclusions here. However, I do find it interesting that my breakthrough story was written from the point of view of an Asian man who has been left on Darcy Island, which was a former leper colony. And I had written many short stories before that, but mostly set in Latin America and places that I traveled. And the breakthrough short story had to do with, quote unquote, Asian material. So yeah, I guess a help.
Okay, not a hindrance then, maybe.
Not a hindrance. I think it was a help. Okay.
As far as your family goes, I think you have a German Vietnamese background.
Mhm.
Was your family encouraging in letting you sort of flourish in the arts? I know you're a musician as well.
Yeah, I think my mom still looks at it as a hobby, more or less. My dad has finally resigned himself to the fact that this is what it's going to be. This is who I am.
Sure.
No, they're pretty supportive.
Right. And in case anybody was wondering, your mom is the Asian one of the couple.
My mom is German, and
your mom is German. Your mother, a German mother, sees it as a hobby.
Right? I know, but I think given my background too, anything that meant I wasn't going to end up in jail or dead in a ditch, they were kind of like, phew, okay. We're good.
That's a low bar. That's a low bar. The ditch prison bar.
Yeah.
Right. Kerri, let me ask you. I'll turn to you, and we'll bring you off mute, and let me know what your parents, were they born in Canada? They were not actually born. They came here at a very young age, though, I think.
Yeah, they were both born in Canada and on Vancouver Island and in Vancouver. And as kids, they were both interned during World War II, and then ended up in Toronto, and they met as adults. And so I think my journey is really, in a way, my journey as a writer kind of begins in Japan, in that mother country, that distant, elusive mother country, and follows the journey of my parents, because that, I'm really a product of all those experiences of migration and displacement and kind of suppressed histories. And I think, although, my journey, in terms of my journey, I think, I always believed in the power of language to tell, to convey, you know, to reach people, I think. But I think my my calling as a writer was really a response to the experiences of my family and the desire to write about something that hadn't been written about very much at that point. My first book came out in 1998. So that was like, it just felt like a cumulative kind of reckoning with my whole history, family history, and my angst growing up as a teenager, and you know, in suburban Toronto, and coming to some kind of understanding about my racial identity and that fraught history.
Sure. I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I knew about the internment of Japanese Canadians, and I have a poli-sci degree, and I read, you know, the news voraciously in my mind, and yeah, so you were. I can see how you wanted to really unearth and tell these sort of untold stories. Philip, I'm going to ask you next. I went to college with and university with a number of people of Asian backgrounds who wanted to pursue, you know, journalism, not even sort of creative pursuits, but things like journalism. And this is a common thing, and we joke about it now, but many of their parents were like, first you become a doctor and then you can, you know, pursue journalism. Like that was a big thing. Now, is that what we're looking at with you, Philip? Were you like, I want to write, but first I'll become a lawyer and then I'll pursue writing, or did they happen in tandem?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hear where you're coming from. It's sort of like an impulse from immigrant families to try to steer their kids to more so-called stable
Right.
professions. And you know, I'm not an immigrant myself, but I definitely come from an immigrant family from Vietnam. But my explanation as to why did I become a lawyer, it's actually a bit in the blood. Actually, I have a great aunt who was reputedly Saigon's first female advocate, and I have lawyers in my family. My aunts are lawyers. My dad originally trained to be a lawyer back in Vietnam, but when he came to the States, he realized that the language barrier was just too great, and so he got into something completely different, psychometrics. Don't even ask me what that's about. So I don't think, so I think, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think my experience is typical why I became a lawyer. It wasn't out of a sense of insecurity, you know, to survive. It was partly because it's kind of in my family background. I find my parents actually, perhaps unusually, were quite supportive of the creative life, actually. They didn't put a, you know, they didn't stomp on it by any means. I have a brother who's a full-time actor in LA, and I have a sister who creates jewelry, and you know, the creative thing and the legal thing, it wasn't one pushing the other. I think they kind of feed each other in my family.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Maria, let me ask you. You know, you were born in Pakistan, and you came here at an age where you could still remember what it was like in Pakistan. When you came here, did your family have certain expectations of you? Did you have expectations of yourself? And because I do remember reading that your writing came from a place of just sort of escapism, and your you know, your drawing it had nothing to do with a career pursuit. When it became that, how did that work, and how did that inform your work?
So I came to Canada with my family in 2000, and my parents are my mother is Gujarati and my father is Bengali. So I grew up in a household that was very mixed, and everyone was arguing all the time, and there was like different languages, different cultures, and I just thought that was the norm. And even within that was a lot of tension. Everyone had different expectations of what you were supposed to do and how you're supposed to keep up the tradition once you leave, once you leave Asia. So, I grew up being told, the same stuff, like be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. As a girl, you should have long hair, you should dress this way, you should not talk too much. And, there's like certain rules that were placed upon you. And then when I went to school, I didn't realize that racism was also then a factor in policing how people of color or women of color or girls of color were told to conduct themselves. So, being told that I looked different and that wasn't a good thing, things that I couldn't control. So, I was living one miserable life in school, and then I would come home and then I would get told, not to, talk in English too much and keep up parts of your tradition and, don't complain too much, this stuff like that. So it was really, art was a form of escapism for me. And I really used everything that was bugging me. And instead of, writing it down, I drew it down. So I would draw things that would happen during the day. If somebody bullied me at school, I would draw a comic book about what happened that day. And instead of it ending poorly, I would draw the last bit of the comic book as like a happy ending. So like a bunch of birds pooped on my bully, or they fell through the ground, or something happened, and I kind of became the superhero, and
Sweet justice.
My story had a happy ending.
Right. Yeah. So your background and your present day were always informing your work.
Yeah, it was a tough time, especially because there wasn't a moment where you could go up to your parents and go, hey, I'm depressed. Like, I'm really sad. They'd be like, what is that? We were depressed. Like, we went through wars. You're not depressed. You're just, being spoiled or whatever. So there was this big stigma against all this stuff. So the only way that I could deal with any of this was through art and through my creativity. And luckily it helped me cope with a lot of that stuff. And to this day, I still use it as a method of jotting things down, documenting what's going on. Communicating how I deal with certain traumas.
Sure. I think many people would recommend, a diary of some kind for coping, for expressing your feelings, and it's just another form of a diary, I guess, when you're drawing, right? Yeah. Now that we know that sort of what your journeys have been to get where you are, I wanted to ask you about this idea of responsibility in literature, and if you feel anything like that, and maybe even before we get to the responsibility issue, I think it's worthy to maybe look at, who do you do your art for? Is it something that's independent and it's for you, and if other people benefit from it, great? Or is there an audience that you have in mind? Kerri, let me start with you and ask you about, who do you write for, and why do you write for them? When I do sort of a public radio hosting, they always say, keep somebody in mind. So it's some woman named Meredith in Flin Flon, Manitoba. You keep somebody so that you feel like you're talking to somebody. But it's similar when you're writing. It can be a lonely pursuit. Who is your audience? Who do you think of when you're writing?
Well, I do think of Meredith in Flin Flon.
That's my Meredith. You can't have my Meredith. Let me have Meredith.
You can share her.
She's gonna get so confused.
It's funny. I think I don't exactly have an audience in mind, but I do feel a responsibility to the Japanese Canadian community, to an Asian Canadian community, because I'm writing about their experience. And this was really true with my first book that dealt with the legacy of internment, and that, the painful experience of state-sponsored racism. I had a very profound sense of responsibility about how I would represent that experience. But at the same time, I did not, I did have my own aims about expressing what hadn't been expressed, about the legacy of that experience. And I wanted to, I think in a way I wanted to speak to a broader audience in terms of challenging an audience to sort of reach out and reach into that experience to understand it without catering to them in any way. But I mean, it was interesting because the book got accepted by a mainstream publisher, and I think, you know, I did feel like there was a kind of, you know, that it was a kind of difficult book for people to sort of, I was interested in breaking stereotypes, expectations about what a Japanese Canadian character would be, and breaking the stereotypes around a kind of benign victim suffering.
What this is interesting and something I wanted to touch on, Kerri, because from what I've read and what I've learned, in general, the Japanese experience, the Japanese Canadian experience has been sort of what happened, and we'd rather not revisit it, and we'd like to move forward. And I think you've written about that. Your parents themselves also were very much like, as supportive as they were of your work, they really wanted to sort of move forward and put the past in the past. So then did that mean that not as many Japanese Canadians read your work as you were expecting, and it wound up being more for a white Canadian audience? Or was that not the point? The point was just to tell a story that was still being true and honest to Japanese Canadians, and whoever reads it, reads it.
Yes, it was. I did want it to be true to a Japanese Canadian audience, absolutely. And, you know, in those days, in the, you know, in that era when there were more and more books being written by diasporic writers coming out into the mainstream, there were all these issues about, you know, about translating dialogue, about glossaries, translating terms, and how much you sort of cater to an outside audience. And I was really adamant that I didn't do that. People would have to sort of make an effort and strain a bit to understand and to enter into the story of a particular community and people.
I think Maria can probably relate to that a significant amount, right? Maria, I thought that was one of the most interesting things about your art at the time, using words like desis and beti, desi meaning people from the South Asian diaspora, just for people who are listening who might be lost here. I hope you'll forgive my translating, even though you don't do it in your work. Or those, you know, those slurs that we wound up hearing from our parents as they were threatening to slap us for misbehaving. You kept those in Urdu, Hindi, or possibly Gujarati and Bangla as well. The ones that caught my eye were Urdu and Hindi words. So I think, what was your motivation there too, to not translate?
Sorry?
What was your motivation to not translate and sort of keep it in its original language?
Yeah, I mean, when I started posting this stuff, I was posting it for my cousins, my brother, like my friends. So, you know, it would be for like a group of 15 people that would be following me. So there was no need to translate. I was talking to my own people. And then little by little, you know, cousins started taking their classmates, who started taking their cousins, who started taking their cousins and their family and their friends. And it kind of grew into this community where it kind of felt like we were talking amongst each other. I really just didn't, you know, feel the need to translate anything. I felt like the community was talking about issues and talking about things that we were comfortable addressing amongst ourselves. And I do believe that, you know, if someone's really interested in learning about our culture, then they can do their own research and translate for themselves. Google is free. So, you know, if there's something you don't understand, you can find out. And I think it also gives people a chance to learn about our culture beyond butter chicken and yoga. So, you know, we can keep having these conversations among ourselves, and anyone that's interested can lean in and listen in. I think that's a positive way to grow and educate.
Yes, sir. You know, my background is in stand-up, and you see comedians in the stand-up world who are, they let the audience come to them, and then you see other comedians who are panderers. They're like, let's go and get stuff out of people. But it's interesting to see that in literature. Yasuko, what was your approach in writing as far as audience, and did you have any sense of responsibility to any community as you wrote?
I'll answer the question of responsibility first. I think if I had felt like I was representing a community, I would have been completely paralyzed. I feel like in writing, I can bear witness to my own story. I can bear witness to stories that were passed down to me from my parents, but I try to underline, both in talks like this and in my work itself, that this is just one point of view. I'm not attempting to speak for others. I'm not attempting to write the truth with a capital T. This is a little truth. This is my truth. It's my family's truth. That I feel like I can have some responsibility for, but more than that, I just wouldn't feel comfortable taking that on. I don't feel that it's my place. And in terms of an ideal reader, I mean, I guess that's who I'm writing towards, is this fiction of an ideal reader I have in my head. And this ideal reader is always somebody who's smarter than me, who's more generous than me. I never want to write down to the reader. And I always feel like if, you know, and this is moving beyond matters of craft, because I think my point of view and who I'm writing for is part of that point of view character, but then we're just getting into a bunch of shop talk, which we won't do now. But yeah, so I try and write for an ideal reader who is smart, who is warm, compassionate.
Okay, if I could write for smart readers, that might help me as well. That's an interesting perspective that I had not considered. Just because I'm like, I can only write, you know, what this mind can handle. Philip, what is your perspective on your writing? Do you have an ideal writer? Do you have a sense of responsibility to an audience in particular?
I got to say, I've got to echo some of what Yasuko said about not being too conscious of the audience that you're writing for. Otherwise, it can be, you know, paralyzing. Like, you know, trying to be the voice of a certain, you know, segment of the population. So I don't consciously, you know, but at the same time, I guess my discovery of myself is that, you know, I tend to believe that you can't really control what your preoccupations are, what your interests are. And I tend to write to my obsessions. And, you know, just looking over my short story collection, I do confess to, you know, an absolute huge interest in Asian culture and in Vietnamese culture, in the stories of immigrants who fled Vietnam because of the war, to stake out, you know, their lives here in Canada or the US or another country. So it just, you know, I can't really control what I'm interested in writing about, and that's what I've ended up writing about. You know, the other thing, and trying to avoid shop talk is you know, I with my last book, I tended to write towards people who are interested in reading short stories, which is never a huge sort of natural, you know, audience. But I was really interested in playing with different voices, and I find the short story collection such an incredible medium for allowing sort of like a diversity of styles, stories, characters, all within the covers of one book. And I tried to appeal to anybody who's interested in the short story.
I remember the first time, Jhampa Lahiri is an author who has a book called The Interpreter of Maladies. And I remember reading, that was the first short story book I ever read, very like later in life. And I remember thinking like, this is almost like cheating. This is unbelievable. You could just write so many different stories from so many different perspectives. And it's, yeah, it's such a wonderful medium. We have 10 minutes until we open up Q&A. So I wanted to jump into some, a broader but tougher question. Do you think art in general and your art in particular can affect change? Kerri, let me ask you that question. Is there hope that art can create change, whatever kind of change? It can be societal or it can be, behavioral. Some people, it's like if I change one person's mind on one thing, they're happy.
Yes, I do. But I think what I think is that the change is the book itself. That's the evidence of social change. That's the archive of our world.
And that's whether it sells or not. That's just the artist putting out the work is the change itself.
It's something,
Yeah.
it is. It's the thing itself. And I mean, you can think about in terms of who writes, who reads and everything, but it's something that has been produced and it's out in the world. And that is the evidence of social change. And I think that's how you have to think of it. You can't, of course, I mean, I definitely want to contribute to making the world a better place with what I do in my actions and my writing. And in my domestic life, I don't want to raise an axe murderer. But yes, I do. And I think, we all want to make the world a better place. And and we have the highest hopes for our work. But I think you have to think in terms of, the thing itself that you create, that you put out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Yasuko, you might be, connecting with Kerri on that low bar. For her, it's don't raise an axe murderer. For you, your family is like, as long as he doesn't show up, in a ditch or in prison. There's something in common that you both have there. But can I ask you the same thing about change and art? What are your thoughts on that? What can I do?
I definitely think that art is one of the best tools for social change that we have. And, I can only speak to my own experience, but my life has been changed profoundly by the books that I have read. I can count among them books that have saved my life in times of crisis. And I can only assume that other people have the same experience and that,
We're losing you a little bit there, Yasuko. We're losing, our worries are coming to, it was all great. And then just at the very end, I lost you. Could you just speak again and we'll see if we still have you? I think I can hear you now. Can you hear me, Yasuko?
Yeah, everything froze up there for a second.
Okay, yes, same here on our end as well. So you were saying that you hope that people have those same experiences like you did with literature that literally profoundly changed your life.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they must, because I'm not unique in any way, so.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you where that question is particularly of interest to me because it's a big discussion in the stand-up comedy world. Can stand-up comedy affect change? And the Donald Trump came along and it was like, well, I guess comedy can't affect change because, the Jon Stewarts of the world and these other incredible comedic satirical minds would have would have changed people's thoughts and not allowed for something, a phenomenon like Donald Trump. So this is just a broader conversation we have in an industry that I know well, but I wanted to get your take on it. And of course, I've read books that have just been like completely mind-blowing and have shifted my perspective and how I think and approach the world, right? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Philip, what about you? Where do you stand on literature and your work in particular, being an agent of change, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of literature in general, I mean, absolutely. I think literature is a cure for one of the greatest ailments that we as societies have, which is a failure to break out of our silos, to reach out to another person, another experience that's different from us. And literature is this great empathetic art form, I believe, that bridges that gap, that makes you stand in somebody else's shoes and see the world through their eyes. I can't necessarily say that my art does that, or that I intend to do that. All I can do with my own stuff is to try to create characters and a world as genuinely as I can. And maybe I don't really put judgment on the worlds that I create or the characters that I create, and I put them into the world and then let the reader kind of read and judge for themselves and maybe take something from it. But absolutely, literature is a great agent of change.
And I'll just remind people, just as we're about 5-6 minutes away from doing a Q&A, that they can put any questions in the chat, and those questions will be sent to me, and I'll relay them to our panel. Maria, what do you think about your art and its ability to create some significant change?
Well, all of my life, I've wanted to be an artist since, I was a baby. And art, any kind of art, music, dance, theater, literature, fine arts. For me personally, art has saved my life, because it's something that, I use to communicate to myself, to others. It's something that I'm very comfortable in doing. And it's how I kind of learn as well. So, for me, art it's just how I learn things. And I know there's others like me that communicate visually and that, need that support, especially in the South Asian culture where we're not really told to become artists. That kind of stuff is still, there's a stigma around that kind of stuff. So I think, I think art is definitely very, very necessary. Art is important. It's been used to document history. It's literally what builds our culture. I think we need more artists. We need to get rid of this idea that art is not a sustainable thing to do. It's something that you do in kindergarten, and then as soon as you grow older, it's a hobby. I think that kind of attitude towards the arts needs to stop.
Well, I want to actually dig into that a little further. So just a few minutes left, and we'll get into the chat. The chat is not in the chat. The chat is in the Q&A. I said chat by mistake, but you can put your questions in the Q&A just as a reminder. But Maria, since you just mentioned it, art should be encouraged. Art can sustain us. I mean, what is in your mind? This was one of the last questions I wanted to ask you all, and you can answer this as an Asian Canadian writer or artist, or as just an artist in general. But where do you see 10 years from now? Where do you see the future of Asian Canadian art in your mind? Where do you see this all going? Do you see it getting better or worse? Do you see more people getting into these fields, and what do you think it'll look like?
I think when you go on any social media platform now, you'll see there's a lot more creators from our backgrounds, a lot more voices. There's a lot more mediums to communicate. I mean, I personally am like addicted to TikTok, and I my For You page is all creators that are Desi, East Asian, and it's just refreshing to see people continuously, and especially young people, coming up with new ways to communicate, new art forms, you know. And I don't think I'll be doing any TikTok dances anytime soon, but I'm really, really proud of everyone that has created them and is, you know, sharing them, especially the art accounts, also on Instagram. There's so many of them. And yeah, I definitely see that there's a lot more representation now, but there's a lot of work to be done, especially by the fine arts community in real life. So galleries, institutions, you know, the media. I mean, I don't own a TV, but you know, mainstream media, there's a lot more work to be done in those traditional mediums to uplift the creators that are kind of doing stuff from home. That's where I see we need improvement. But yeah, I think there's way more representation now than when I was starting out.
And so no dancing from Maria Qamar on TikTok coming up anytime soon. You heard that here first. I would be addicted to TikTok as well, except that I have teen daughters, and I just remember when my mother got on Facebook like 10 years ago, I was like, no, come on, you're ruining a good thing here, Mom. You can't be on the thing I'm on. And so I can't get on TikTok. Then my kids will be like, you ruined something wonderful for us. Yasuko, can I ask you, where do you see art in 10 years from now, particularly from the lens of Canadian Asian writing?
Well, I definitely am not going to dance on TikTok either. I'm just going to get that out there. And
good to know. Good to know.
Yeah. Well, I hope that it continues to allow for many more voices. I just think back to when writers like Wei Sin Choi were first publishing, and Jim Wong Chu, and the battles that they had to fight against, and the room that they created for writers like us. And I hope that, you know, in our way, we're doing the same thing and just creating, you know, a wider platform for more voices.
Philip, I'm going to ask, there's a few questions in the Q&A. Let me ask you this. I think I should ask all four of you, are there challenges in particular that you face with creating and publishing in Canada? Has that been a challenge? That's Manuela has asked us that in the Q&A, and I think that's a great thing. You know, people who are aspiring to get into your line of work as well should know what's out there, what's ahead, what lies ahead is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's sort of like a matter of setting your expectations. For one thing, I've been publishing almost exclusively short stories, so I never expected a massive audience. As a Asian Canadian writer, I think for me anyway, I haven't figured out whether that's like ultimately an advantage or not. I personally think that I've gotten a lot of opportunities by being Asian Canadian. And, you know, as a writer, you know, including being on this panel or getting to meet mentors like Jim Wong Chu, and having my manuscript read by an organization like the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. In terms of challenges, I suppose one that I'll mention is that, you know, first of all, I have gone through amazing editors, sharp as a nail. My editor, Bethany Gibson, who edited my book of short stories, is absolutely amazing. But I do find that, you know, because there's a relative dearth of Asian Canadian editors, I feel that the responsibility for getting those cultural specific things in my stories right, that's kind of more on me. And it's sort of like a, you know, because it's not good, if I miss it, nobody else in the publishing world will likely get it before it goes out. And so I think that because there's a relative, you know, not as many Asian Canadian editors in the publishing world, that for me that poses a few things to think about anyway.
Amateur move on my end. Kerri, how about you? I mean, your first book was in 1998, and you know, I know you took some time off. for axe murdering related issues. But what have you seen a big change in that time since you've come back? And are there more challenges or less in your mind?
I think there's more work being published. I think it's there's really exciting writers out there and coming from really diverse experiences. And the Asian Canadian, the whole the whole cultural landscape of Asian Canadian and racial designation is like, there's so much diversity. It's like the most diverse minority group, right, of any, I think. And so there's more and more stories out there. In terms of getting published, I guess to be simplistic about it, I think that I really feel like if you just keep working really hard and be prepared to work hard and not be prematurely focused on getting published, you'll get there, and find the right place for yourself. Not everyone's place is with a mainstream publisher. There's all sorts of different sites, I think.
Sure.
And and I'm sorry, I just wanted to add this about social change and literature. And I think there's probably so many, examples of books that have made such an impact on the world. But in my own sort of sphere, I wanted to say that the book Oba-san by Joy Kagawa is a classic example of a book really bringing social change in the most concrete and concrete, direct way. That she published this book that sort of broke the silence around the internment, and it garnered such a wide readership. It really brought kind of pride and to the community, I think, to see her work recognized and gain such a wide readership. And it emboldened people to then sign up to demand redress from the government. And it led to, I really believe that book was absolutely instrumental in facilitating the redress movement that led to compensation for individuals.
Wow,
So
great.
That's an important example.
Yeah, no, of course, maybe one of the most important. There are a few more questions and not very much time. What can I ask you, Maria, about any challenges you faced in creating and publishing in Canada? Has that been a challenge?
I mean, the username hate copy just, could tell you that I wasn't a fan of writing to begin with. It was a corporate job that I took on because I didn't want to tell my parents that I wanted to be an artist full time. So for me personally, writing a lot was a challenge, but this thing kind of this opportunity came to me through my visual art. So it was an offer to write something about what I was drawing about. So I think it was a good first step for me to write a picture book. But I think the writing part itself was a huge challenge because I didn't see myself as a good writer. But I think what was most important was the story that was being told. And one of the challenges was that how do I tell this story about myself without being, like shy about it or the fear of being judged for who I am, because you spend your whole life being judged about all these things. So Trust No Auntie was actually just a collection of things that I was getting judged about by my aunties and by other people. And then the fear was that, yeah, okay, I'm approached by this publishing company, but am I strong enough to put this thing out? That's, there is an interview that I do with my mom at the very end. about what she thinks about this book, and it's hilarious. But it, the challenge was kind of getting over that fear of like, okay, this is going out into the world. This is not a joke. This is like a very serious thing, and am I ready to face the aftermath of it? So yeah, I think the biggest challenge with being published is just figuring out whether or not it's the right move to do for you and for your life, because it does take a lot to be an author. You're giving your story out into the world, and you're letting people read it and judge it and rate it. So that's
Sure.
the challenge for me. It's more of a mental health thing.
Right. Yasuko, you can probably relate to that as somebody who has a memoir also. We have 4 minutes left. We have about 5 questions. I can only get to one, and I can only ask you for 1 minute to answer, but I think it's a great question. Sherry Parkin is asking this. Is it important to you all to be identified as Asian Canadian authors? I think that's a good way to sum this up. It's a conversation we have all the time. Do I want to be a great Pakistani comedian, or do I just want to be a great comedian? But the Pakistani informs it. So this juggling act there. Yasuko, let me ask you first how important that is, Asian Canadian, that title.
I'll leave that up to other people. Whatever they want to call me, I'm good.
Okay. That is quite succinct, and yet quite valid as well. Kerri, what about you?
I think how I identify myself is really depends on the context, and how it is useful, or helpful in whatever context I'm in. So I'm pretty fluid that way, I think. Yeah.
And Philip?
But yeah, I'm pretty happy to call myself an Asian Canadian writer, partly because what does that really mean? There's so much diversity in that concept, Asian Canadian. Like, how do you even define it? I found great touchstones of people who are interested in that culture, and I don't find that identifying myself as an Asian Canadian writer necessarily confines me in terms of what I write about. So I'm totally happy with that.
Okay, Maria, same question to wrap this panel up. I'll ask you that. Is that in any way beneficial? Do you like being, a Pakistani Canadian or a Desi or a South Asian artist?
Yeah, I mean, being a Desi is the only lens I know how to look through. So it is what it is. But for everything else I'm doing, I'm an artist. Take that how you will. My background, if it matters to you, then yes. But the context of my work revolves around South Asian stuff. My voice is, all based in that. So yeah, I'm with Yasuko on this one.
Right. With 2 minutes to spare, I will turn back to Daphna in a moment, but Kerry Sakamoto, Philip Huynh, Maria Qamar, and Yasuko Thanh, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for this discussion. At times, I felt we were just sort of getting warmed up the first hour of our discussion, and then we'll have more. And I know there's a lot of richness and depth to what we can talk about here, but I appreciate your time. I think in this pandemic Zoom world, an hour is what we can give people. That's what we can ask people, including of you. So thank you very much for being part of this. I'm going to turn things back to Daphna Rabinovich right now. Daphna, are you there? You're waiting in the wings, I believe. Yeah.
I am. Oh my gosh. Thank you all so very much, Ali, Maria, Yasuko, Kerri, and Philip, for lending us your time and giving us all these insights. It was an absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. For anyone out there who missed tonight's event, or somebody who potentially missed it, as Ali said at the beginning of the hour, this video will be available on our website and our YouTube channel in the upcoming days. And I hope to see you all back here on June 21st, when we will focus on Indigenous Heritage Month. Thank you and good night.